Welcome back to the channel, and if you are new here, you have found exactly the right place for stories that settle into your chest and stay there. Get comfortable, because this one is going to take you somewhere you will not want to leave. If you love supernatural romance with slow burns, hidden bloodlines, and heroines who are never truly invisible, just unseen, hit that like button right now and make sure you are subscribed so you never miss a story like this one.
Tell me in the comments, have you ever been the person everyone looked past, only for someone to finally see exactly who you were? I want to hear your story. Now, let us begin. There is a kind of silence that belongs only to women who have learned to make themselves small, not the silence of peace, not the quiet of someone content with stillness, but the deliberate and practiced erasure of presence that becomes over years as automatic as breathing. Mara Voss had cultivated that silence the way other women cultivated beauty or political alliance, or the kind of laugh that makes a room turn toward you. She had made herself into something the eye slides past, something the mind forgets before it finishes registering, and she had told herself on the harder nights that invisibility was its own armor, that being overlooked was not the same as being worthless.
She had told herself this so many times that there were moments she almost believed it. She was 23 years old and she had spent her entire life within the walls of the Solaris Palace, not as a member of court, not as a guest, but as an auxiliary archivist, which was a title that sounded more significant than it was. In practice, it meant that Mara cataloged, repaired, and shelved the documents that the senior archivist did not have time to handle themselves. She spent her days in a room that smelled of old paper and cedar oil, surrounded by accounts of wars and bloodlines and shifting pack politics, reading about a world in which she had no meaningful part. She was an omega without a pack mark, which in the hierarchy of wolf society placed her somewhere between inconvenient and invisible.
Her mother had died when Mara was 6, leaving behind no pack affiliation, no political connections, no inheritance beyond a small leather journal filled with pressed flowers and half-finished poems. She had grown up in the palace through a program for orphaned omegas that no one wanted, trained as an archivist's assistant at 14, and had received exactly one performance commendation in all that time. A brief handwritten note from senior archivist Calloway that said simply, reliable and thorough. She had kept it folded in her pocket for a week before deciding it was perhaps the most honest assessment anyone had ever offered her, and she had framed it on the small shelf above her cot. The moon ceremony was announced 6 weeks before it was to occur, and the announcement moved through the palace like a tide. Mara already knew the ceremony from the records she had cataloged, an ancient Solaris Pact tradition older than the current royal line, held when an unmated Alpha King required a bondmate. Every unmated Omega of majority age within Pact territory was required to attend. The moon chose. The choice was considered binding. There had not been a moon ceremony in 41 years. Alpha King Kyle Dravon, 29 years old and ruler of the Solaris Pack for 6 years following his father's death, had apparently decided it was time, or more accurately, the council had decided for him, and he had not refused. Mara knew his history from documents and records and the careful dry language of official accounts.
He had assumed the throne under difficult circumstances and responded to every challenge with a precision that official records called decisive and his detractors called ruthless. He was, by every measurable standard, an effective ruler, and by every account she had ever overheard in the corridors, cold in a way that felt almost architectural, as though warmth had been removed from him structurally and the space sealed over so cleanly that no one quite remembered it had ever been there. She prepared for the ceremony with the same methodical thoroughness she brought to every assigned task. She found a white dress at the second-hand market in the lower town, slightly too long, which she altered herself over 2 evenings with the small sewing kit she kept in her desk drawer. She pressed it carefully, polished her only pair of formal shoes, arranged coverage for her archive duties. She did all of this with the quiet efficiency of someone completing a required administrative task, which was precisely how she had decided to categorize the event in her mind. Attendance was mandatory. She would attend. The moon would choose someone appropriate, and she would return to her archive room and her life would continue in its established shape. She did not allow herself to want anything from it. Wanting things was a kind of exposure, and exposure was something she had spent 23 years carefully avoiding. The night of the full moon arrived with a sky so clear and saturated with stars that even the most hardened palace staffs paused to look upward. Mara walked to the celestial court through corridors she had walked 100 times, past guards who did not look at her, past senior courtiers who moved around her the way water moves around a stone, not acknowledging the obstacle, simply flowing past. The celestial court was the most extraordinary space in the palace, a vast circular chamber whose roof was entirely open to the sky. Its walls formed of arching stone columns draped in climbing white roses. Its floor a mosaic of silver and blue tile depicting the mythology of the moon's relationship to wolfkind. Tonight, it was transformed by floating silver lights that drifted at varying heights and cast everything in a soft, wavering glow.
The gathered Omegas wore white and silver, their gowns creating a sea of pale fabric. There were women from the great noble houses, daughters of allied pack ambassadors, merchant class Omegas, and healers and teachers, and at the outer edges, palace service staff in simple white. Women who had learned, as Mara had, to take up as little space as possible. She found a place near an outer column and stood quietly and waited with the patience of someone who has learned that waiting is simply the texture of most moments. Before we continue, listen to this message that could save your life. Excess sugar in the blood can lead to a number of serious health complications. Diabetes significantly increases the risk of heart disease, including heart attacks. High blood glucose levels can damage blood vessels,
increasing the risk of strokes. In other words, at any moment you could suffer a sudden heart attack or stroke. Right now, if you have any type of diabetes, your life is at great risk. Stop everything now. Your health, your well-being, and your future deserve it. Click the link in the first comment and watch the video that will change your life. Watch it to the end and discover how to take the next step towards a life without limitations.
Control is within your reach. Link in the first comment to watch the video. He entered at the stroke of midnight, and the silence that fell was so sudden and total that she could hear the soft movement of the floating lights above. King Kale Draven walked as though the floor had been specifically constructed to support the weight of his attention, his posture carrying the quality of someone who has never had to learn to fill a room because the room has always rearranged itself around him.
He wore the traditional ceremonial garments, deep charcoal and silver, and he looked like something out of the historical records, significant and remote and belonging to a story in which she had no part. He stood at the center of the floor mosaic, and the ceremony master began speaking. The ancient words of invocation that Mara recognized from the archived records, the acknowledgement of the pack's dependence on the moon's wisdom, the formal request that the moon's light descend and reveal its choice. The king stood through all of it with an expression she could only describe as the face of someone completing a required administrative task. She recognized it because it was the same face she suspected she was wearing herself. Then the floating lights dimmed,
and the moonlight came in. It came through the open roof differently from ordinary moonlight. She knew that immediately, not intellectually, but physically, in some layer of herself that existed below language. It was silver and warm at the same time, which should have been impossible, and it moved with intention the way water moves when it knows where it is going. It touched the gathered omegas the way a hand moves through a crowd, brushing surfaces and moving on, and the women it passed over sighed or stilled, or stood with their eyes closed and their faces upturned, hoping. It moved through the great noble house daughters, through the ambassadors' omegas, through the merchant women and the healers.
Mara stood at the outer edge and watched with detached attention because the moon was not going to choose her. And she had known this before she arrived, and she had made her peace with it in the practical, unsentimental way she made her peace with most things. She was watching the light's movement across the far side of the room when she became aware that something had changed in the immediate vicinity of where she was standing. The air felt different. The column beside her had taken on a quality she could not name. And then she realized that the floating lights above her head had gone completely dark because the moonlight was on her. It was on her in a way it had not been on anyone else in the room. Not a brush or a linger, but a full, complete, unambiguous descent. The light pouring over her as though it had been waiting specifically for this coordinate, this moment.
This woman standing at the outer edge of the crowd in a second-hand white dress, with her hands folded and her face entirely unprepared. It was warm and silver, and it went through her in the way truths go through people when they stop running from them, all the way down to the place where she kept the things she had decided not to want. It found those things, it illuminated them. It said without words, in the language of light and ancient intention, here, this one. I choose this one. The silence in the celestial court became something structural. Every face had turned toward her. Every breath had stopped. And across the open floor of the mosaic, the king was looking at her, and his expression was something she had no archival record for. Not the cool composure she had seen from a distance.
Something raw, something that moved across his face in the 2 seconds before his control reasserted itself. And what she read in it, with the accuracy of someone who has spent years being invisible and therefore watching carefully, was shock. Genuine, unguarded shock. And beneath the shock, something else.
Something that looked almost like recognition. Then his expression settled back into composure, and he smiled. And it was the smile she had heard described in corridors and offices and the break room adjacent to the archive. The smile courtiers called charming and adversaries called dangerous. And she recognized it, seeing it now directed at herself for the first time, as a mask. A very good mask, carefully made and long worn, but a mask. "The moon," King Kale Dravan said, his voice carrying across the silent court with the ease of someone who has never had to raise it to be heard, "appears to have a sense of humor." The words were quiet. They were not quiet enough. Every person in that room heard them. Leave a comment right now and tell me what you felt in that moment, because we are only at the beginning and it only gets more intense from here. The formal acknowledgement of the ceremony's result came 3 days later, delivered by a bewildered herald to the archive room while Mara was in the middle of repairing a damaged binding.
She listened to the full official notice, set down the binding when he left, sat for a moment, and then finished the repair because the repair needed finishing, and walking away in the middle of a job was not something she was willing to start doing now. She moved to the East Wing quarters that evening. They were larger than any rooms she had occupied in her life, 3 times the size of the archive room, with windows overlooking the royal gardens and furniture that cost more than her annual stipend. She set her belongings on the bed, which took 4 minutes because she did not have many, looked around the room for a while, then sat at the desk and opened her mother's journal and read the half-finished poems, which she did sometimes when the world felt too large and too strange, and she needed to find the small, steady thread of continuity that connected her to something real. The assigned court liaison, a beta woman named Petra, in her 40s with the efficient assessment driven energy of someone who has spent her career managing situations other people have made complicated, arrived the following morning. She looked at Mara the way a structural engineer might look at a building described as unstable, not with contempt, but with professional interest in what exactly was holding it up. I am going to be direct with you, Petra said. Your situation is unusual. The court is going to require handling. The king is going to require a different kind of handling. And you need to understand how power works in this palace very quickly if you intend to survive it. She paused.
Do you want my help, or would you prefer I manage your calendar and stay out of your way? Mara looked at her for a moment. Help me understand the power dynamics, she said. Please. Something in Petra's expression recalibrated. All right, she said.
Let us begin. The formal presentation to the king was in his receiving chamber, a room smaller and more austere than Mara had expected, communicating authority not through abundance, but through the deliberate removal of anything unnecessary. He was standing rather than seated, which was a deviation from ceremonial protocol, and deviation from protocol was information. She stood at the entrance for 3 seconds, and did what she always did in situations that required more of her than she was certain she had. She found the stillness inside herself, the place her years of invisibility had made very strong, the place that knew how to be present without being diminished by whatever the room chose to offer her. Then she walked forward.
He studied her with the focused attention she had seen him use on council members in archived public hearings, attention looking for something specific and accustomed to finding it. You are an auxiliary archivist? He said. Yes, she said. He waited as though she might add something further. She did not. He looked at her for another moment, and she had the impression this conversation was not going as he had expected. I am going to be direct with you, he said. The moon's choice creates an obligation I recognize, but my pack's stability and my council's confidence are not things I am prepared to compromise for a ceremonial tradition, however ancient. I intend to honor the form of the ceremony's result. In return, I am asking for 90 days,
during which we can determine whether the moon's choice reflects something real or represents an anomaly. The way he said neither of us when he framed the uncertainty told her he was trying not to place blame, while also not accepting more than he had to. 90 days, she said, to determine whether I am real. Something moved behind his composure at the word choice. To determine, he said more carefully, whether the bond the moon indicated is genuine, and if at the end of 90 days you determine it is not, we will discuss what arrangement serves both the pack's interests and your own. And if you determine it is, he was quiet for a moment. We will discuss that too, he said. It was not much. It was also more honest than she had expected, and honesty was something she had learned to value precisely because it had not been offered to her frequently. All right, she said, 90 days. And something in his expression shifted, minimally but perceptibly, like a door expected to be locked that turns out not to be. She continued her reporting to the archive room every morning because Senior Archivist Calloway had not received official notice that Mara's duties had changed.
And because the archive room was the most comfortable place in the palace, and she was not ready to give it up. Calloway received her on the first morning with careful neutrality, looked at her once over the rim of her reading glasses, and said, "The Harmon correspondence needs cross referencing with the border treaty files. Can you start there?" "Yes," Mara said, and sat down and started there. And the morning had a texture that felt, for the first time since the ceremony, almost normal.
She saw the king 4 times in the first week, none of them arranged. Twice in palace corridors, once in the garden during a morning walk she had not known he took, once in the library when he was in the reading chair by the east window with a policy document and his composure slightly reduced by what she could only interpret as genuine tiredness. He had looked up when she entered, and there had been a moment before, either acknowledged the other, a moment with a quality she could not yet name. "Archivist," he said. "Your Majesty," she said, and found her reference text and left, and stood in the corridor outside for 5 seconds, doing something that was not quite recovering but was adjacent to it. He appeared in the archive room doorway on the 12th day. She looked up from the Harmon correspondence. He looked at the room, the shelves reaching the ceiling, the paper smell, the organized density of everything. "You are still working here," he said. It was not quite an observation and not quite a question. "Senior Archivist Calloway has a backlog," she said. "I am useful here." He looked at her for a moment. "May I come in?" She registered that he had asked. "Yes," she said. He came in carefully, the way people enter rooms they recognize belong to someone else. He stood looking at the shelves. "You know what all of this contains?" "Most of it," she said. "I have cataloged approximately 80% of the physical holdings. The remainder I have read through the indexes." He turned to look at her with the quality of focus she had come to recognize as his way of looking at things he genuinely needed to understand. "What would you say is the most important thing in this archive?" She considered the question seriously.
That depends on what you consider important. There are documents that are important historically, legally, politically. There are also documents that are important because they tell the truth about things the official record has chosen to present differently.
He was very still. "For example," he said, and this was the moment she recognized it as such, where the 90 days stopped being a negotiation and became something else. She looked at him steadily and made a decision that was, in its quiet way, the most consequential one she had made in her adult life. "Sit down," she said. "I want to show you something." He sat, and she showed him. Do not go anywhere, because what she showed him changes everything. Subscribe if you have not already, because what comes next is the part I have been building toward since the first sentence. The document was in folder 7 to C of the bloodline record section, not technically restricted, but organized in such a way that a person without purpose would have no reason to look there.
Mara had found it 8 years ago during a routine audit at 19 years old, alone in this room, and had read it with steady hands and then spent 3 days being very quiet and very methodical about not thinking about what she had found, after which she had begun thinking about it constantly in the background of everything, the way a structural crack in a building affects how the whole thing sits even before anyone goes looking.
The document was a private bloodline verification, the kind conducted by a senior pack genealogist rather than the records office. It documented the lineage of a woman named Kara Voss, Mara's mother, tracing her bloodline not to the indeterminate lower territory origins shown in the official lineage register, but to the founding bloodline of the Solaris pack itself, the original Alpha line. The line that had been recorded as extinct in official histories for over 100 years.
The document was signed by 3 witnesses. 2 signatures belonged to men who had subsequently served on the Pack Council. The third belonged to the senior archivist who had held Calloway's position 40 years ago. She showed him the document and the contradicting official entry and let him look at both for as long as he needed. She did not fill the silence, which was one of the things she had learned to do well. He was quiet for a long time. "This is your mother," he said finally. "Yes," she said. "This says her bloodline traces to the original Alpha line." "Yes," she said. "Which would mean," he said, and stopped. "Which would mean I am not an Omega of indeterminate affiliation," she said. "I am an Omega of the founding bloodline."
The one your Pack's records say does not exist anymore. He looked at the document again with the expression of someone watching a building he has always believed to be stable reveal that its foundations are different from what the blueprints showed. "Who else knows?" "No one," she said. "Why?" She looked at him steadily.
"Because 8 years ago, I was 19 years old with no pack, no allies, no political standing, and no means of verification beyond a document that the people whose signatures it bears had every reason to deny. And because the question of who falsified the official record and why is a question whose answer I suspected would be dangerous to anyone who helped me ask it." He was looking at her with the specific attention of someone genuinely trying to understand.
Not to analyze or strategize, but to understand, which was a distinction she was beginning to think mattered considerably. "But you are telling me now," he said. "Yes," she said. "Why now?" She answered with the same honesty she had been offering him since the receiving chamber. "Because the moon chose me, and I have been trying to understand why for 12 days.
The only answer consistent with everything I know about the Pack's ceremonial theology is that the moon does not choose based on social rank. It chooses based on bloodline compatibility with the Alpha line. Your bloodline is the continuation of the original. If mine is what this document says, then the moon was not making an error. It was making the most historically precise choice it could have made. The silence that followed was not empty, but full, weighted with the restructuring of everything around a new point of understanding. He looked at the document, then at her, then at some middle distance containing several years of implications. "The signatures," he said. "Counselors Harmon and Dre," she said. "Harmon died 9 years ago. Dre is still serving." Something moved behind his composure that was not merely political calculation, but older and more personal. The expression of someone understanding that a betrayal they did not know about has been present in their life for a very long time. "The document is genuine," he said. "I verified it," she said. 8 years ago, I spent 3 weeks cross-referencing the genealogist's other verified records to confirm his methodology and handwriting consistency."
"The document is genuine." He looked at her then with that quality of attention she had been carefully not letting herself fully receive. And what she read in it at this distance, with no armor left to manage it through, was the look of someone who has found something real and is working out slowly and with great care what to do with that. He said, "I owe you an apology." She had not expected this. "For the moon ceremony," he said, "what I said. The moon appears to have a sense of humor." He spoke the words as though they tasted poorly. It was said in surprise, but it was said in front of the entire court, and it was a cruelty you had done nothing to deserve. She looked at him. "I have been called invisible for 5 years," she said, "in every language except the direct one. Your comment was at least honest." "Honest and kind are not the same thing," he said. "No," she said.
"They are not." He looked at her with an expression doing something new, something that involved a genuineness his composure usually prevented, as though the document between them and the conversation they had just had together, made the mask slightly less necessary. I would like to understand you, he said. I realize that is not a simple thing to ask, but I would like to try. She thought about the 19-year-old who had found this document and put it back and carried it alone for 8 years. She thought about the moon's light going all the way through to the place where she kept the things she had decided not to want. Alright, she said. You can try. Hit that like button right now and leave a comment, because this is where everything begins to change, and I need you with me for every moment of it. The following weeks had a quality different from anything that had come before, for either of them. They met in the archive room most mornings, which had begun as a practical arrangement and became something else without either of them formally acknowledging the shift.
He sat across the table and she showed him things. Not just the bloodline document and its related records, but everything she had noticed over 5 years of careful attention. Documents that revealed in aggregate a picture of the pack's history that differed significantly from the official narrative. The falsified records were not isolated. They were part of a pattern, subtle and deliberate and spanning decades. A systematic erasure applied to anything that might have supported the original bloodline's continued existence. Birth records reclassified, genealogical verifications misfiled. A private correspondence between senior council members discussing, in careful and deniable language, the management of a bloodline question. He listened with focused, unhurried attention, not the performed attentiveness of a politician, but something more direct and more personal. And he asked questions that told her he was not just accumulating information, but genuinely thinking. She found quietly and without making too much of it that she liked watching him think.
She noted this the way she noted everything carefully without rushing to conclusions about what it meant. He, for his part, was doing something she could only describe as opening slowly and with the carefulness of someone who has not opened a thing in a very long time. He told her about his father, about the last 2 years of the older man's reign, and the particular loneliness of being surrounded by people watching you for weakness.
He told her about the Crescent Ridge confrontation in his first year, not the official version, but the real one, which had included a night in a border camp when he had genuinely been uncertain he would survive. She listened without commentary, which was what he seemed to want, and she noticed that this genuine listening without the filtering lens of political calculation was something he was responding to as though it had been rare in his life. Counselor Dre became aware that the arrangement had changed, and his response was first indirect, a motion framed in procedural language about archive security compliance, and then more direct. He came to the East Wing to request a meeting with Mara. Petra intercepted him with the polite immovability that is one of the most effective tools in political negotiation, and conveyed that the chosen Omega's schedule did not permit it. When Mara told Kale about the attempted visit, she watched something move through his expression that was colder than anything she had seen from him, directed at anything else. Not theatrical cold, but the genuine article. The coldness of someone who has fully understood the shape of a betrayal and is deciding what to do with the knowledge. There was an evening 38 days in when they had finished for the night, and she was putting documents back in order, and he was at the window overlooking the royal gardens, and the silence between them had that comfortable quality she had come to recognize. The silence of two people who do not need to fill space to be at ease within it. He said, without turning from the window, "What would you have done with it? The document, if the moon ceremony had not happened?" She considered this. "Kept it," she said. "I have been keeping it for 8 years. Eventually, someone would have come looking for it. I would have decided then." He turned from the window and looked at her, and the quality of that look in the evening light was different from anything that had come before. Not the look of a king conducting an assessment, but the look of a person who has been paying careful attention to another person and has arrived at the specific knowledge of them that comes only from attention, given without agenda. You would not have given it to anyone who could not be trusted with it, he said. No, she said. How did you know I could be trusted? She was quiet for a moment. I did not know with certainty, she said. But I am a person who reads documents carefully, and you are a person who tells the truth, even when it would be easier not to. And there is a kind of consistency in the record of that which can be assessed. He looked at her for a long moment. I think the moon was not making a theological statement, he said. I think it was recognizing something I was not capable of recognizing myself. She waited, because the statement had several implications she needed to handle carefully. And now, she said. He looked at her with the most fully present expression she had seen on his face in 38 days, the composure not gone but no longer primary, something underneath it that was quieter and more real. Now, he said, I am asking if you would like to have dinner with me. Not a state dinner, somewhere without the documents between us. She thought about the things she had decided not to want. She thought about the moon's light finding them. Yes, she said, I would like that. Leave a comment right now telling me you are okay, because I am not entirely okay and I need company. Like and subscribe, because the confrontation and the ending are going to make everything worth it. The dinner was in a small sitting room adjacent to the royal library that she had not known existed, with a fireplace and bookshelves and a table set simply, without ceremony. He was already there, wearing clothes that were not the formal garments of a king, but the quieter clothes of a person who has decided for one evening to be only what they are. They ate and they talked, and the talking was the kind that happens when two people have moved past the surface layer into the actual territory of who someone is. He told her about the books that had stayed with him during years when reading was the only part of his day that belonged entirely to himself. She told him about the documents in the archive that had surprised her, the personal letters from historical figures whose public record gave no indication of the inner life the letters revealed. They talked about the pack's history and what an honest history might look like, and he said that building something on a falsified foundation required more honesty than most political processes were designed to accommodate.
And she said that most people were capable of more honesty than the systems they lived within asked of them, and that the gap between what people could bear and what they were offered the opportunity to bear was one of the most consistently underestimated things in the historical record.
He looked at her when she said this as though she had confirmed something he had been thinking for a long time without finding the precise language for it. They sat long after the food was finished because neither reached the natural end of what they had to say, and the fire burned down and the room grew quieter, and the quality of the quiet was the kind you do not want to break, because it is the most comfortable thing you have felt in a long time.
When she finally stood to leave, he walked with her to the door, and they stood for a moment in the doorway, and she was aware of the particular quality of proximity that arrives not when two strangers are close, but only when two people who have been paying careful attention to each other find themselves suddenly in the physical fact of that attention.
He reached out very slowly and with great deliberateness that was itself a question, and rested his hand against her jaw, and she was absolutely still, not because she was uncertain, but because she was completely present in it. Mara, he said quietly, and her name in his voice had a quality it did not have in anyone else's. Yes, she said.
And he bent and kissed her with the same deliberateness he brought to everything that mattered, careful and direct and without performance. And she kissed him back the same way, and it was quiet and significant and real in the way only things earned through time and attention are real. He pulled back and looked at her, and something in his expression had a settled quality she had not seen before. The look of something arrived at its proper place after a long time in transit. "I would like to not wait out the rest of the 90 days," he said. "You are the one who established them," she said. "I know," he said. "I was not yet a person who could see clearly. I am asking if you will forgive me for that." She looked at him steadily. "There is nothing to forgive," she said.
We both had to get here at our own pace. He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to her knuckles, a gesture older and more formal than what they had just shared, which meant in the ceremonial language of the Solaris Pact, which she had cataloged extensively, an acknowledgement of debt freely given. She knew this. He knew she knew.
She said, "Tomorrow we bring the archive record to the council." He said, "Yes." She said, "It will be difficult." He said, "Yes." She said, "Are you ready?" He looked at her with the most unguarded expression she had ever seen on him, the composure present but not primary, everything underneath it visible and steady. "With you." He said, "Yes." The council meeting was called for the 42nd day.
Mara attended as the moon-chosen Omega and sat in the seat directly to the left of the king, the seat that had last been occupied 41 years ago, with her hands on the table and her expression the still, attentive look of a person who has spent her career making herself invisible and has decided that this skill will now be deployed differently, not to disappear, but to see without being anticipated. The council settled into its established dynamic, and Councillor Dre opened with the security review motion, rephrased, this time framed as concern about archive document management protocols. 3 other members added supporting framing. She listened to all of it. Then she looked at Kyle and he gave her the smallest nod, the communication of 2 people who have built a shared language of small signals, and she opened the folder she had brought. She presented the bloodline document first, explaining in the careful, precise language of her profession what it contained, how it had been verified, and its relationship to the official lineage register entry that contradicted it.
She watched the council members' faces as she spoke, noting calculation in several, discomfort in 2, and in Councillor Dre, as she moved to the second document, something adjacent to fear, the expression of someone watching a structure they have maintained for 30 years begin at last to be named. She presented the pattern of erasure, the reclassified birth records, the misfiled genealogical verifications, the private correspondence. She laid each document on the table and named what it showed with the measured, unhurried clarity of someone who has been waiting 8 years to say this out loud in a room where it cannot be managed away. When she finished, Kyle spoke, his voice carrying the authority that was not performed but simply present.
He said the archive record Mara had presented represented a systematic falsification of Solaris Pact historical records spanning 30 years conducted at the council level, serving to erase the legal status of a legitimate bloodline claimant. He said that under Solaris Pact law, falsification of official genealogical records was a criminal matter falling under the Pact's judicial authority. He said he was formally requesting the judicial board convene to review the evidence and that in the interim, Councillor Dre was to be suspended from council duties pending investigation. Dre argued that the document was old and unverified, that the genealogist who signed it had died and could not be consulted, that the chain of custody was irregular. Kale let him finish and said that the document had been verified by an archivist whose professional competence was beyond question, that the verification methodology was thoroughly documented, and that the chain of custody was entirely clear, since the document had been continuously housed in the palace archive under this care of successive senior archivists, at least two of whom had been aware of its existence. Dre looked at Mara, and the look had the quality of someone who has just understood that the thing they underestimated was the thing that was going to undo them. She looked back with the still attentive expression she had been wearing since she sat down, and she did not blink. Senior Archivist Calloway was in the archive room when Mara returned that evening, sitting at the central table with the appearance of someone who has been there long enough to have decided what she's going to say.
Mara sat across from her and waited. Reliable and thorough, Calloway said, which was not what Mara had expected, and which moved through her in a way she had not prepared for. I wrote that commendation the day after I read your verification methodology notes. You were 19 years old, and you had done work a senior genealogist would have been proud of. She paused. I knew what you had found. I have known since the day you found it.
I put those notes in the file because I needed there to be a record that you had been here, that you had done the work, that there was a reason to keep you in this room, and not transfer you somewhere without access to the things you might need. Mara sat with this for a moment. You could have told me, she said. Calloway met her eyes. I could have.
And I chose not to, because you were 19 and alone, and there was no protection I could have offered. Then that would not have put you in more danger than staying quiet. I made a choice. I am not certain it was the right one. But it was made in the direction of keeping you whole until you were ready. The room was quiet. Thank you, Mara said, and she meant it in all the complexity of what it encompassed, the gratitude for the protection and the grief for the years of carrying it alone, and the understanding that love, in the forms available to people with limited power, sometimes looks like this. Like a commendation in a pocket, like an untransferred file, like a door left ajar rather than opened wide. Calloway said, Go. He will be waiting for you. Mara stood. At the door, she paused.
I am still coming in tomorrow, she said. The Harmon cross-referencing is not finished. Something moved across Calloway's expression. That was the closest thing to warmth Mara had seen from her in 5 years. I know, Calloway said. I will have it ready for you. The judicial proceedings took 3 months and were conducted with the thoroughness the archive record demanded.
At their conclusion, Councillor Dre was removed from his position and formally censured. 2 other council members received lesser censures and records correction orders, and the official Solaris Pack lineage register was amended to reflect Mara Voss's correct bloodline standing.
The falsified records were documented, annotated, and preserved in the historical archive with full notation of their falsified status, because Mara had argued in the formal proceeding that arresture was not the appropriate response to historical falsification. The accurate thing, the honest thing, was to let the record show what had been done and when and by whom, so that those who came after would understand the shape of what they had inherited.
The judicial board accepted this argument, and the king seconded it, and the precedent it set would shape the pack's approach to historical record correction for generations. The bonding ceremony was held on the first full moon following the proceedings' conclusion, small as Mara had asked for and Kale had agreed to, without requiring explanation. The people present were the people who mattered.
Petra, with the expression of someone whose professional investment in an outcome has been amply rewarded. Calloway in the second row with precise posture, and the commendation she had written 8 years ago folded in her breast pocket, which Mara knew because she had seen it. He took her hand when the ceremony required it, and looked at her with the expression she had been given the privilege of watching develop over 4 months, from the unguarded shock of the celestial court to the deliberate, settled knowledge of this moment.
A king who had learned in the company of one specific woman that power and honesty are not as incompatible as he had been taught, and that the most significant thing he would ever do in his reign would not appear in his political record, but in the private record of who he chose to become when someone chose to see him clearly.
She looked back with the expression that was simply her, the still attentive, present expression that had always been her fullest self, offered now without the armor of the invisibility, in the full light of being known. I choose you, he said. I choose you, she said, and meant it in every direction, the past and the present and the future of it, and all the things she had spent 23 years deciding not to want, finally, completely, and without reservation, hers. 5 years later, the pack's historical archive was the most rigorously maintained in any wolf territory, recognized at the Interpack Historical Society Conference 3 years running. Senior archivist Calloway had retired gracefully 2 years before, after completing a 5-year record correction initiative that she had designed and Mara had implemented, resulting in the amendment of over 400 documents influenced by the previous council era's falsification culture.
Her replacement was a beta named Thomas, who had come up through the archive staff. Mara's first recommendation, described in her letter simply as reliable and thorough. Calloway had read the recommendation and looked at her and said, "Yes, I thought you might say that." This king of the Solaris pack could be found on most afternoons on the floor of the archive room with his daughter, who was 3 years old and named for Mara's mother, and who had,
against all apparent genetic probability, given her parents considerable tendencies toward composure, an energy that could be heard from the corridor, and a laugh that arrived before she did. He sat on the floor building structures from empty document boxes and explaining with great earnestness whatever she had asked him to explain, which was everything, because she was 3 and 3 is the age when everything is a question. And Kyle Draven, it turned out, was a person who believed every question deserved a real answer. Mara watched this from the central table where she worked and felt, in a ways she no longer needed to manage carefully or hold at a distance, the full weight of it. The shape of a life she had not allowed herself to want. Real in every particular, present in every detail, hers. The moon does not make errors. Sometimes it simply sees further than we can, into the place where what we have been told we are and what we actually are have not yet been reconciled, and it names the reconciliation before we are ready to hear it. Mara Voss had spent 23 years being invisible, carefully and honestly, and with the steadiness of someone who has decided that the work matters even when the recognition does not come.
And when the moon's light found her in the celestial court and went all the way through to the place where she kept the things she had decided not to want, it was not making a mistake or offering an anomaly or demonstrating a sense of humor. It was saying simply, "Here, I have been watching. I know what you are, and I have found the person who, given enough time and enough honesty, will know it too. Thank you so much for being here for this story. If it moved you, if any part of it stayed with you, please leave a comment and tell me which moment was the one that got you the most. Mine is the commendation in the pocket. Mine will always be the commendation in the pocket. Like this video, if you want more stories like this one, subscribe so you never miss a new upload, and share this with someone who needs to hear a story about being seen. I will see you in the next one.